you never know who's watching.
Mm-hmm.
Be helpful to people. You want to make sure that people remember you for not just doing your job, but also being able to be enjoyable to be around, be memorable in some way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the WIT podcast. You get to hear from Kara Goldin today. And in this podcast, she's going to tell you some amazing stories, but I don't want it to stop there. Make sure to pick up her book, Undaunted, either at your local bookstore or get it on Audible. It's full of so many more stories that will help you feel less alone on your entrepreneurial journey, and even just less alone in life as you navigate career choices, big decisions, setbacks, successes. So get your notebooks out, however you take your notes, whether that's pen to paper or on your phone. Remember, here at the WIT podcast, we want you to get at least 3 tangible tips and tools and tricks that you can use in your life as you go off to live a life of doing whatever it takes. Enjoy. We've got somebody here. I'll give you a hint. Oh my gosh, I'm so cheesy on who it is.
Yay!
I'm trying a new flavor today. We got Kara Goldin here today. And
Right
cheers. Let's cheers. So I'll cheers you
Woo-hoo!
in the camera. It's so fun because I finished your book, and just even like knowing the history behind the white label and everything, it's so fun.
Thank you so much.
And I will say to everybody, we are going to touch on the journey of Hint on this podcast, but to really understand the whole journey and to get the best picture of it, I just highly recommend her book, Undaunted. I finished it on Audible. I enjoyed that because she reads it. So there's something I think really cool about having the founder and the author read it to you. So obviously you could buy it. We're going to do a fun book giveaway at the end of this podcast with Kara, but to get the whole journey from start to present day or to finish, whatever, read the book, because it has all the details and everything like that. So thank you for joining us today, Kara. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the plug for the book. I love it. So a lot of work goes into creating a book, as any author figures out, maybe not at the beginning. It sounds like a great idea, and then it's a lot of work. And so I'm so happy whenever anybody talks about it. So it's great.
Yeah. We like to jump right in here at the WIT podcast, and we have a really wonderful group of listeners at the WIT podcast. We get this range of a 16-year-old up into like in their 40s, even in their 50s, but we have a sweet spot of that 16-year-old to 26-year-old. And I usually ask people, are you doing today what you thought your 16-year-old self would be doing? But because of your experience in your 20s, which I really want to get into, are you doing today what you thought your 21-year-old self would be doing?
Absolutely not.
Okay, tell us more.
Well, actually, it's interesting because I wanted to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a journalism major with a minor in finance, and I really wanted to write. Writing was always something that I really enjoyed a lot. But I also ended up, when I was going to college, I ended up taking some finance classes because I felt like, I don't know if I didn't have the right math classes when I was in high school or what, but I felt like it really challenged me. And I was always... I was an athlete growing up, and I was always looking for the next challenge. And whether that was, trying to figure out what was my next race that I was going to run, or I was a gymnast and was constantly trying to find teams that I could be on where people were a little bit better than me. So anyway, I felt like I would do something probably around writing. That's where I thought I was starting when I went to work at Time Magazine, but I couldn't actually get a job there because I didn't have the right experience according to the HR department. So I just suggested that if there's another job in the building, maybe you'll hire me for that. That's what everybody says, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You can take out the garbage. You can do the mail room. That was like a common phrase that people would say. So I had heard that. I never really absorbed what that ultimately would mean. But it was along those lines of just take a job anywhere just to get your foot in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I ended up getting a job as an executive assistant within the Time Inc. organization in something called circulation, that was all about subscriptions. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is, you know, totally dating myself, but if I wouldn't have had that experience, understanding subscriptions, understanding everything like, top of funnel and new subscriptions versus, loyal subscribers, all of those kind of elements, and how copy makes such a difference, how audiences and targeting audiences, all of those things. While I wasn't initially totally responsible for those things, I was surrounded by people who were. So it was a
Mm-hmm.
very, very powerful lesson. And again, that, while that wasn't journalism, that kind of led me to what I was doing when I was 21. And if I wouldn't have had those experiences, I wouldn't have been able to ultimately launch Hint, ultimately, launch a direct to consumer business within Hint, and really know what the elements were that we needed in order to have a successful online business.
I think what your story, I just want every, in particular, like my early 20-year-old girls, well, young women, to read this book and to hear your story, because something that you embody that I think is missing, or that people don't quite understand, is so key to being successful. Kara has a humility and that is, I think, really contributes to the success that she has had. Because when you hear how she talks about her experience being an executive assistant and starting off in the business world, the ego isn't there, Kara. The ego that is killing people today and keeping people from actually setting themselves up to be successful isn't there. Where did you get that? Where did you have that understanding that you were there to learn, and you talk about in the book, to make your boss's life easier?
Yeah, well, I touched on this a few minutes ago, but I think actually starting out as an athlete, and
Uh-huh.
even further back, starting out as the last of five kids, right? You're just constantly trying to figure out, I don't know, how to entertain yourself, how to challenge yourself in ways, and I think that continued on as an athlete. But I think also working, I've been really fortunate to work for really great people. I always had a no asshole policy of going to work for people that I liked. I know people that went to work for people that they didn't like. And I'm not saying that every moment, once you pick somebody that you think, oh, this person is amazing, they're really smart, I'm going to learn a ton from, it doesn't mean that, every step along the way, every day is amazing and,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. But I think I picked well, but I also realized that over my journey, I've been able to meet incredible entrepreneurs and as well as colleagues that they should have been, or I should say, they should have had a lot more ego than they did. Right. And what I
Mm.
realized is that, things like kindness and attitude and lifting people up within your organization, and also being able to understand the consumer, have empathy for the consumer, things like that were just really powerful lessons for me. And again, coming from people that were, maybe misunderstood in some ways for people that didn't really know them, for example. So people like, although I didn't work directly for him, an entrepreneur like Ted Turner at
Mm-hmm.
CNN, where I
Mm-hmm.
went after time. I talk in the book about Brooke McMurray, was
Mm-hmm.
my first boss, and she was unbelievable, but she also had a lot going on that I didn't know about even before I got the role. But what she taught me too was shooting it straight, and that everyone's going to be nice, but it's really how they ultimately, what they deliver
Hmm.
ultimately, and and how they support you. That's what's really going to matter in the end. So again, I think, in short, I really think it's about finding the people that you believe you're going to learn from,
Hmm.
that are kind, authentic, and are going to help you get to that next point. I think it's the wrong idea to say, okay, I'm going to go inside of this company. I'm going to go and work for a jerk, and somebody that, is not going to treat me the right way, is not going to, um, you know, help me learn things that I think I should learn. And I'm going to move next year to the next spot. I think gone are the days where you sit there and think about your career as, I'm going to go inside here for 1 year. I'm going to get moved up to a manager, director, senior level, and I'm going to, continue on. Right. And
Hmm.
I think that the people that just go in it saying, I'm going to go and learn from this person because they seem like somebody that I would enjoy learning from. It's kind of the same thing. Like, I was just helping my son figure out some classes that he was taking, or actually going to drop some classes and going into the next classes. And I sort of gave him the same advice. It's like, who do you want to learn from? I mean, look that professor up, try and understand what experiences they've had. What would be like a home run for you if you walked into that classroom,
Hmm.
if you walked into this role and you learned three things, and you walked out of there knowing those three things? Maybe you don't even know what those things are, but you want to learn something about, you know, direct to consumer and loyalty. You want to understand, you know, how they or how they thought about content. I don't know,
Hmm.
whatever it is. Like,
Hmm.
pick three things. And by the way, you can change those three things along the way. But I think really thinking about what are you going to learn from those people is where it just helps you to be satisfied. It helps you to have goals. Um, all of those things. I think more than anything, I think back on that, I kind of thought about that, right.
Well, I think I would totally agree with you. And I want to encourage the people that are listening and watching today, like, where are you putting yourself in the position to be a learner and to be curious? Because I think what I kept noticing was your willingness to be the learner and to be
Mhm.
the listener. And I think for all of you out there, because these Do It podcast episodes are like coming to class, coming to school, for like we like to say, the real world school, once a week. Where are you listening and staying curious versus acting like you know it all and thinking like your boss owes you something, or you think that you're deserving of X, Y, and Z without putting in the work? What you'll hear in Kara's journey in Undaunted is how many times she chose to listen and to
Yeah.
be a learner. Can you just, off the top of your head, take us to a moment, to a conversation that you can think of? I have some from the book we can talk about, but one might come to mind of where you really felt like your choice to be the learner and the listener really moved the needle for you.
So one of the stories that I think back on was actually right. It was the kind of career I had before I decided to start Hint, and and I was running the shopping marketplace at America Online, and we were kind of, I viewed the world as building a mall, and an online mall. And so, for those of you who weren't alive during this time period, it was it was really the wild, wild west. It was
Mhm.
people would set up a store. Nobody really talked about like, how do I get people to come? So this idea of actually having a community, I had been in a startup that was acquired by America Online. And I mean, there was no blueprint for how to do this. So I started thinking about I've always thought about if I don't understand something, I've always thought, okay, what is it that's kind of like this, even though it's a little bit different? And so that I can describe it to people. And then maybe that's what I'm going to focus on so I can go learn from it. So when I thought about this as an online mall, I kept using the word mall. And so I went and studied malls. And I'm not a real estate developer, but I got really good at studying malls. So I, went to Stanford Mall and I started looking at the difference between Stanford Mall. To me, they had really nice stores, fancy stores. There was Nordstrom's and J. Crew versus some of the other malls that might have Target that were called strip malls. What did
Mhm.
that look like? Who were they? And ultimately, I asked the question, what did I want to be? What did I want the AOL marketplace to really look like? Who were the consumers that I felt were going to be coming in and then coming back again? And this was truly the early days of direct to consumer that as we were starting to think about it, and frankly, many other malls ended up developing and kind of mimicking what we were doing at America Online. But the one category that I saw that we just couldn't land anybody was books. And so I started thinking about, okay, we've been successful in apparel and, you know, music and lots of other categories, but I didn't know how to get two of the biggest bookstores. We talked to them, but they didn't want to be a part of a mall. They wanted to do their own thing and they had enough traffic from their own individual stores, so they were not in. And I thought if I can get somebody to show them that they could do really well on our service, then maybe they'll end up coming. So the person that I kept hearing about, or I should say the brand I kept hearing about, but it was tiny, was this company in Seattle called Amazon. And they were, it was crazy. This guy, he was in finance, worked on Wall Street. Like, how does he think he's going to compete against the big, bookstores that were fighting it out? And so one day I cold called Jeff and I said, I had no contacts with him at all. And I said, hey, I work at this company, America Online. I'm building out a mall. Oh, yeah, I've heard of America Online. Is there any way we could meet? Because I really want to talk to you about being a part of this. Oh, I don't think I want to do that. I don't have the money to do that. It's just like same old conversation. So I convinced him to take a meeting with me. I said, I'll fly up there. I live in San Francisco. I'll come up. So I come up to meet him. He said, I have to meet you at my warehouse. It's just by the Seattle airport. And I can't meet you until 5 o'clock because I have a bunch of stuff going on, but I will do it if you come up. So I bring my colleague with me, go up there. We're like driving around. America Online gave me one of these large phones, right? So I had a
Yeah.
phone in my car. This is 1996. It's crazy. And so I'm driving around in this, area where there's a bunch of warehouses and there's no numbers on the buildings. And so I'm driving. It's 5:15, and I'm like, oh shoot, he seemed like he was like business, right? I'm
Mhm.
afraid he's not going to meet with me if I'm now it's 5:15. So I call him and he said, "Yeah, where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I don't think there's numbers on the warehouses." So I see this guy like flagging me down from far away, and so I said, "Okay, I see you." So I drive over. It's like 5:20, and I'm getting out of the car, and he was like, "I can't meet with you now because it's 5:20." And I'm like, oh, come on. And I said, can I come back? Like, I'll stay over, whatever. And he said, I've got to build a bunch of bookcases. It's just not a good time. And I'm thinking, I just flew here
Yeah.
for this meeting and you have no addresses. I said, I wouldn't have been late if there were addresses on the warehouse. I'm sorry, so rude. And he said, listen, if you can build bookshelves with me, then you can stay. And so me and this other guy started building out bookshelves with Jeff Bezos. And I'm looking around. Granted, this is the warehouse, this isn't his office, but I'm like, he's the CEO and he's building bookshelves. I'm not sure that he can really compete with Borders and Barnes and Noble. And so, as a probing question, I said to him, so why do you think you can compete against Borders and Barnes and Noble? I mean, this is a really bold, really ambitious thing that you're doing, is launching a bookstore, an online only bookstore. And he said, do you read? And I said, I do. I do read, Jeff. Thank you very much. And he said, so do you ever ask for recommendations when you go to the bookstore? And I said, sure, everybody does. And he said, so how does that go? I mean, are you happy with your recommendations that you get from the person behind the counter? And I'm like, it just depends. I mean, the person can't be equipped to know every book and every category, but sometimes, but probably most of the time, not, right? And he said, so the future of books, in fact, the future of all online sales is recommendations. And I said, so how are you going to get there? And he said, I'm working on it. So this is 1996. And have you ever heard me share this story?
No, no,
I
I
know.
haven't.
It's crazy. So
And
this
it's
got
not in
cut.
the book. So this is,
Yeah,
I'm
this
loving it.
got this got cut from the book. The book was 600 pages, whatever. So a lot of stories got cut. But I remember walking out of there. We finished building bookshelves and he's working hard to make sure that all the books are getting set up and he's got space for the new books that were coming the next day. But I thought, the guy's got a vision. I'm not sure how he's going to get there, but he's got a vision. The other thing that I took from that, and again, you couldn't, to coin Steve Jobs' term, you connect the dots later, but arguably it took him 20 years to actually achieve recommendations. And obviously, he became more than a bookseller. I'm quite sure that that was always his plan. But the messaging that the average consumer got and his short-term goals, like he couldn't get to recommendations until he made sure that he did those steps right along the way. And they weren't going to be perfect, but he was going to work and be relentless with achieving this overall goal. And he saw it. He saw that vision along the way. So I guess the bottom line is, I mean, there's so many lessons learned in there. First of all, Jeff is, super smart. He is really wants everyone to be on time. It's not the most, you know, not the most, give you a break kind person, but warm and fuzzy, I guess is the right word, but incredibly bright. From that moment, I remember walking away thinking, holy moly. And he did end up working with us eventually. And Barnes and Noble and Borders also ended up working with us. So I think it was actually the right move to basically get him in to sort of lead the way to some extent. And Borders obviously is nowhere to be found today. So that's another lesson learned, is having an audacious goal and vision for a business when everybody else thinks you're crazy, thinks that you're nuts, but you put those stakes in the ground. Maybe even you give people snippets about what the future is, it doesn't mean that that goes in your, frontline marketing, right? You have
Hmm.
to hold on to those stakes and inspire, educate, make sure that you're going somewhere so that, and while also making sure that the steps along the way are being met too. So
Yeah.
lots of
Well,
goals, lots of lessons.
lots of lessons from you just showing up and being persistent, right? And being willing
Totally.
to go in there and build the bookcases, not getting the ego in the way of saying, like, "Oh, no, I'll come back when you actually, I can have it sit down and have a conversation with you." You're willing to go in there, get your hands dirty, have the moment, ask the questions, listen. And it makes me think of what, I mean, when you were talking about him building the shelves, it makes me think of what you were doing when you were starting Hint, and you were getting your hands dirty, so to speak, and you're in there coming up with the different concoctions, but then you're the one that's driving it around and dropping it off, and then you're storing it in the garage, and the kids are having the garage having the lemonade stand sale, but the Hint sale, and doing that. And I think so many times, because we have a lot of young entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast, they're just seeing on Instagram, 5 or 10 years out of these people, of these founders, and wanting that to be them when they're just getting started. And I always want to remind them of just the beauty and the good that comes from being in the trenches. Like I remember
Totally.
those days. I mean, I'm not in this office, but in one of my offices, I have the first t-shirt that I wore that to promote my company. And it was a white Hanes t-shirt with blue Sharpie with the name of my company written on it. And I showed up to events with that. Now it's sort of embarrassing to think about, I'm not embarrassed, but I think about now, probably people are like, I'm not going to take this girl seriously with a Sharpie designed shirt. But I could see it, but I hadn't, the funding hadn't caught up yet to get everything going. But I remember those days of just trying different things and being the one that walked around. And back in the day, my promotions were like going into Jamba Juice and putting up flyers and pinning them up to the board. I mean, we didn't have certain types of marketing options back then that we have today. But I think that you talk so much, Kara, about being in the trenches of your work, of the work that you were doing. And you seem to have really, when I hear your voice talking about it, you seem to have kind of liked it, of doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's the stories. We still laugh. I mean, there's so many stories
Yeah.
along the way. And, I'll run into people that are, you know, early Hint employees, and we'll just crack up about, those days, and, and also the other businesses that I've worked at too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing that I've learned along the way too. We ultimately ended up starting our direct to consumer business from a mistake actually that we made along the way, which, many people wouldn't view it necessarily as a mistake. Many
Mm-hmm.
people would view it as a failure. But if I can share that story, that
I
was
mean,
also really
I love your
interesting.
stories. I've been listening to
So,
them for days now, so I I love them.
so basically, we launch in, actually there's a couple of stories in here that were really fun. So, we get a phone call from, we had been trying to pitch Starbucks
Oh yeah,
forever,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
ever. And they just kept being like, no. And we'd send them hint and they wouldn't respond. And we were just like, oh, it'd be so great if we ever got into Starbucks. And then finally one of the buyers called us and she said, so we'd love to meet with you, but we don't want to talk about Hint, the one that is,
Mm-hmm.
for adults in the bottle. What we want to talk to you about is creating a box drink. This is before we had Hint Kids that really helps people have an alternative to apple juice. And I'm like, oh, we can do that. We hadn't done that. We had some prototypes that we were playing around with in those boxes. They're called Tetra Packs, but we hadn't done it yet.
Mm-hmm.
So she said, I just have to, tell you before you come up, please don't pitch me on the Hint. We're only talking about the kids. I don't want you to get too excited about, this opportunity. We're just kind of thinking about it. And of course, I'm saying, yes, I'm going to get in the door. So she really made it very clear that if you walk in the door and please don't have samples,
Yeah,
a
I love
hint. I'm like, okay, but we're basically going to put hint in into the box. Don't, like, how are we going to do this? And we're not going to be able to like prototype it unless, I mean, you can just imagine it in the box anyway. So my husband, who was the chief operating officer, goes with me, and we land in another Seattle company. We land in Seattle, and he said, "So do you have? Let's stop by Whole Foods and get some samples." And this was before Hint was in airports, so we were, you can't take the water on the plane very easily.
Right.
So we go to a store and go buy some product, and I said no. She was very specific about it. I don't want to be kicked out of Starbucks, the buyers meeting. And I mean, she was like seriously serious about this. And he's like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, what do you mean you can't bring your product in? Like, this is nuts. And so I said, okay, how can we do that? Okay, so I'm going to bring it in and I'm just going to be drinking it. And maybe I'll have an extra bottle because maybe somebody will ask for it, but I'm not going to tell her that I have the samples. And he's like, whatever, this is absolutely crazy.
So
So we go to the meeting, and I'm like, trying to follow the rules. I'm like so excited and, inspired, enamored, like by this idea that we've even got a meeting. So we walk into the meeting, and she says, so do you have samples? And I'm like, this is a trick question. And so I said to her, this is a trick question. You told me not to bring any samples with me. And I said, but I do have these prototypes. And then one of the people who was in the room, who was her boss, said, so you don't have any hint with you? And I'm like, okay, do I trust this? Is she going to kick me out of the building for this? And I said, well, I have my bottle that I'm drinking. And I said, but you know what? I have an extra bottle that I was going to have after, but you can have it. And she said, oh my God, I'm so thirsty. Thank you so much. And so the woman who told me that, you know, don't bring the samples in, she's just sitting there staring at me. And luckily, she didn't tell my husband. So he has like 6 bottles of Hint that are ice cold. And he said, I have water with me right here. Do you want some? Do you have Hint? Do you want the Hint? And she said, I would love it. And so here I was basically taking everything that she said as, don't do this. And instead, sometimes you just have to take the risk. I ultimately don't think that meeting probably wouldn't have gone well if we didn't have water there. So don't take no. Don't if somebody's telling you to do something that you just think is weird and probably not right for your business, trust your gut on it.
Yeah.
And bring it in anyway. So we end up having a meeting. They call us, and we and basically they were going to do a tiny test with the Hint kids. And we thought, okay, well, we've got to actually figure out how to create it and figure out the manufacturer, all the stuff. And then probably 2 days later, the woman called and she said, we were all talking. I think we should, instead of the kids, launch the Hint, the regular Hint that you guys do, the blackberry flavor. And could you guys launch it in 30 days? And I thought, oh, wow, that's really going to be pushing it. But yes, I didn't know how we were going to do it, but we were going to do it. And so then she called back. We were just going to do a test. I think it was like 100 stores. It was, not a lot of stores for Starbucks. So she called back and said, so we were wondering, and I know this is really pushing it for you guys, but is there any way you guys could do 2,000 stores? At that time, they had about 6,000 stores. And I was like, 2,000? I mean, this was going to be a big chunk of our overall business. And I was so excited. I still didn't know how we were going to be able to achieve this, but we were going to make it happen. She calls back a week after that and she said, "What if we launched it in all 6,000 stores?" I hadn't even figured out how to launch it in 2,000 stores, but I was like, yes. And I was like, oh my God, what have I signed up for? We have to make this happen for sure. So we end up launching in 6,000 stores. And on the day that we launched, I said, I'm really trying to figure this out. I appreciate this opportunity. But what is success to you guys? And she said, "Oh, that's so interesting. No one's asked me that."
It's such a good question.
And
It's a very important question.
yeah, what is success? Because I mean, I'm kind of I'm on cloud nine feeling I'm super successful because I'm in 6,000 Starbucks stores, but I don't want that business to go away tomorrow. And she said, if you do a bottle and a half per store per day, then you're successful. So it took us about 6 months to sort of get to that point and got the kinks out of, the distribution, and people got to know the product. Because again, we really were only known in kind of the Bay Area, a little bit in New York, but we were really on the coast and definitely not in Seattle. And here we are in Chicago with them, in South Dakota. Nobody had seen this product. They had no idea what it was. We weren't doing any marketing or anything. So we launch it, and about 6 months in, we're doing a bottle and a half per store per day. And again, being the person that is, always wanting to do better and setting new goals. Once I'm reaching those goals, I'm like, we got to get to 3 bottles per store per day, and we're just going to kill it. So a year and a half in, we're doing 3 bottles per store per day. I'm feeling excellent. It's overall about 40% of our overall business at this point. Very important customer. We were spending all of our time on, making sure that Starbucks was happy. We get an email from a new person introducing herself, and she is the new buyer for Starbucks. And she said, "So nice to meet you. I just, heard great things about you and Hint, and we love Hint. It's all great. But I have some bad news for you." And I'm like looking at my numbers, we're doing three bottles per store per day. And she said, "We're changing strategy. Nobody told me that this was going to happen, right? And no, we're changing strategy, and we want to put food into the cases. And we want to maintain exactly the beverages that are branded Starbucks, or that are, we're distributing some other products, or I should say, other companies. Pepsi was distributing some Starbucks products, so they weren't going to kick out the Pepsi companies. But I didn't have an argument for them. Other than, oh, you must be thinking of somebody else, because we're doing 3 bottles per store per day.
Yeah.
That's double what success was, or the previous person. And she said, "I know, I'm really sorry." And I said, "So when were you thinking this was going to happen?" And she said, "Next week." 40% of our business going down to 0. So I was angry. I cried. I mean, all of those emotions, because here I had all this product already made for Starbucks.
And you hit the goal. I mean, it's very hard it's hard as a human being to be like, I've exceeded the goal. I exceeded your expectations, and you're still not happy. That would be hard.
Right. And, they didn't have to buy it. It's not like you have a contract that says, oh, Starbucks is going to continue buying it. They're going to buy it. In my mind, they're going to buy it as long as you're successful. What no one tells you is, when a new person comes in to an organization, they're not necessarily going to tell you, the suppliers, "By the way, we're going to have a new person come in, and they're tasked with building an entirely new strategy and revenue stream." They'll tell you after they've done it. And then they'll tell you that you're not part of it. Right. And that's a really important lesson, because if you're banking on this business going on forever, And this really applies to so many situations. This could
Oh, yeah.
apply to, you know, suppliers of yours, right? Not just like you being on the other side of things. Like you were thinking everything's great. Well, all of a sudden somebody comes in and is willing to pay more money for something that you're dependent on, right?
Hmm.
For your business. Like let's say that you have a food company and you're dependent on this ingredient. And all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, we're going to buy it all. Then do you have a backup plan? So the lessons learned from that, especially if somebody is that critical to your overall business, you have to have options. This applies to when
Hmm.
to employees. I mean, something I learned along the way as well, actually from being an employee, not being a boss at that time, but I remember seeing my bosses at CNN were constantly interviewing and also at AOL constantly. And I kept thinking, oh, they're going to fire me, right? Something's going to happen where I'm going to be without a job. And I remember saying to my boss at AOL, it makes people feel really uncomfortable when you're, interviewing people for roles. And I'll never forget that his name was Meyer. I never forget Meyer saying, well, so how do I know that you're not going to leave
Hmm.
the organization? So I always have to know who I'm going to call and to replace you, because nothing's guaranteed, right?
Hmm.
So anyway, it's a story. Any way you look at it, have options, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Along
I'm
the way.
even thinking about it with those people that are listening that are launching, because we have a nonprofit over here at WIT. We have multiple revenue streams and we're not reliant on government grants or one specific donor. Because if that one specific donor decides to pull their funds and you've launched an entire program around because that
Totally.
funder did it, or you've relied on the government to give you a certain grant and then a new administration comes in, they're not going to be like, oh, we care so much about Sarah in her work. They've got their own agenda. And so I've always taught our young people, just it's so cliche, not cliche, but it's just this idea of like diversifying it, your multiple streams of revenue. My kids
Totally.
that are launching businesses, and we'll have one come on right now. I mean, she started with scrunchies, but then she went to makeup bags, and then you're going to do like have different products, different options. I don't think you should get spread too thin, but make it make sense for sure. But don't be so reliant that if you're one person pulls, then you're screwed, because also that means you're actually their employee. You're working for them, because if you're waiting for
Yeah,
if they are supplying everything that you need, then you're not in a position to say we are serving a lot of people. You're serving one person, and if they pull, then you're out. Um,
totally.
I,
And I think it's, during the pandemic, I've talked
oh,
to a number. We luckily had manufacturing in multiple locations all over the US, but there were many people, in particularly the apparel industry, that, there were factories shutting down in different parts of the world. They were on a whole different time with this
mm-hmm,
virus. And I mean, many companies went out of business for that reason. They couldn't get their product because they were totally reliant on, a factory in China that the
mm-hmm,
government had shut down, or Europe. And there was nothing that could be done. And they had no options. And by the time they were looking for options, I mean, it was cost prohibitive for them
mm-hmm,
to be able to open up anywhere else. So again, like it doesn't mean that you have to have uh at minimum two options at all times, but you keep the irons hot, right?
yeah, I love that.
I mean, you're constantly doing that. And anyway, so to end the Starbucks story, uh, we get booted out of there. We have product in a warehouse that is going to go bad. I'm going to have to go back to uh, all of my investors by tell everybody like Starbucks screwed us. And like, I mean, what they'll hear is, oh my God, this company's going to go out of business, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not, I mean, at the end of the day, it's sad, but it's your problem. And this sucks, right? And what were you doing? What were you thinking about prior to this happening in case it did happen? And I wasn't thinking about it. So I kept thinking, where can I get rid of this inventory and make some money before it actually goes bad and I make no money and have to
Mm-hmm.
destroy it. All of a sudden, I get this email from somebody who worked with me at Time Magazine. So here I was, remember, the executive assistant, and this gentleman worked at Sports Illustrated at the time. I kind of knew who he was, but he was like two levels above me. And he reached out to me, he said, "You probably don't remember me. This is from ages ago, but I remember you were always willing to be helpful. And you always were funny, like at the copy machine. You would just like crack people up. You were always like, oh, I'm not busy right now. If there's anything I can do to help you." I don't even remember this, but that was his take on me. And somebody told him that I was now responsible for starting this company, this product that he loved. And he was tasked with starting the direct to consumer grocery business at America Online. Again, the subscriptions, the
Mm-hmm.
early days of direct to consumer made total sense. So he said, I'm reaching out to you because I love Hint Water. Every day I walk into Starbucks and I buy my bottle with my espresso. And I was just curious if we can put you guys into this test with our grocery business that we're launching on Amazon. And I'm like, sure, when do you need the product? And he said, well, that's the problem. I kind of need it like yesterday. How long would the lead times be? And I said, you know what? If you wire me the money, then I have the product. I'll maneuver it so that you can actually get it and you'll have it tomorrow. I said, how much product do you need? And he said, like 2 truckloads. And I'm like, this just solved my problem. So definitely first, lots of lessons there too. You never know who's watching.
Mm-hmm.
Be helpful to people. You want to make sure that people remember you for not just uh, doing your job, but also being able to, um, I don't know, be enjoyable to be
Mm-hmm.
around, be memorable in some way, but also, uh, think that maybe when you connect the dots between a product that you like
Mm-hmm.
and the person that you're excited to reach out to them, also have your email available, on the internet or whatever, so that people know how to get a hold of you or be visible. I think is important. I never did tell them that we're getting kicked out of Starbucks. I thought, if he asks, I'll definitely share that, but I don't want to tell the sob story of that we were
Right.
getting kicked out of there. And we became the number one grocery product on Amazon in the grocery business almost overnight in those initial tests. Like we were just killing it. And I'll never forget because this gentleman told me that, they had all this data on our consumer. We had no data because, again, we had been selling through
Mm-hmm.
retailers like Starbucks. I started thinking, gosh, if I would have had the data that they had then when we got kicked out of Starbucks, we would have been able to write to all these people and say, oh, we're available in all these other stores, but nothing. Now we just, had gone away overnight. People probably thought we were going out of business. And so it was at that moment that I thought there's always going to be people that are shopping online at Starbucks, but I need to launch my own direct to consumer store.
Mm-hmm.
So many people said, you're never going to be able to compete against Amazon. And I believed that as well. But from my days at AOL, what I understood, and kind of going back even to the Amazon story with Barnes and Noble and Borders, that there will always be people that are going to want to go into physical stores. There's also going to be people who are going to recognize a brand and want the convenience to be able to order it online. And there's going to be people that are going to want to shop from a mall-like environment or someplace like Amazon. And there's also going to be people who are going to want to go to the brand. And that was like a real foreign concept. This is 2012. People were not thinking about it still that way. And especially in food and beverage. And so it kind of, to end the story, it sort of went full circle because there were a lot of lessons learned there. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have had the inventory to go into Amazon if we wouldn't have gotten bounced out of of Starbucks. And ultimately, um, I think that the courage to be able and the understanding of being able to launch a direct to consumer business too kind of came off of being able, this thinking of I need to be able to own at least a piece of my own, you know,
Mm-hmm.
destiny, right? And also have a lot of other options. So I can't just be in Starbucks. I can't just be in Amazon. I have to have my own. I have to have all these retailers out here and really have an omni-channel approach. So we were talking omni-channel before anybody was, talking omni-channel probably back in, 2012, late 2011. And I think like the last, real big lesson is if you feel like if that business, if that relationship, if that employee goes away tomorrow, it's okay for it to hurt a little. It's not okay if it's going to completely disrupt your
Mm-hmm.
business. And I think that is something that I always encourage any entrepreneur to think about it. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
It's very true. Okay, we're gonna take a pause here and bring in, this is like one of my favorite parts of our show, is bringing in our special guest host. We bring in a special guest host to these interviews because we like to bring in that young leader who we know is doing WIT in their life and giving them a chance to meet someone that they look up to. So Kara was the person who Claire chose she really wanted to ask you some questions. So Claire, I want to welcome you to the show. You can go ahead and show your video.
Hi, Claire.
Hello.
All right,
I just
Claire,
want,
I'm gonna let you go ahead and jump in and ask your first question.
I just want to do first thank you for the coming onto the podcast. It was really nice hearing about your stories and your experience. So my first question is, what is something that you wish that you had known before you started Hint?
I think something I wish I would have known is that whatever I choose to do, that's not going to be the end. When I think about my much younger self, I kept thinking that I originally wanted to be an attorney. I kept thinking,
Yeah.
okay, when I get to be an attorney, that's going to be an exciting career. I'm going to be like doing that. And then that's going to be, that's it, right? That's what I'm going to do
Mhm.
for my whole life. And the majority of people I know have had this very non-linear career, right? That they're doing a lot of different things along the way. I don't think anyone ever said to me things like, make sure you are working for somebody who's really kind. Of course, I wanted to do that
Mhm.
and smart, but I think that those are very, very key things that uh, I think if somebody is smart and they're kind and you see that they want to be helpful, more than likely, if you're continuing to do what you're doing and helping them look good or helping them
Mhm.
achieve what's hard for them, whether it's their business or jumping in or whatever it is on
Mhm.
something and being helpful, it's going to work out for you, right? It'll
Mhm.
call it karma or whatever it is, it ends up coming back. And I wish people would have said that to me versus me focusing on, you know, there's this reach goal
Mhm.
and that's what's going to, if I get there, it's going to be great. And I think that knowing that I was going to be doing a lot of different things. I was going to continue learning along the way. I didn't even think I was going to be an entrepreneur, even though people said, of course you were going to be an entrepreneur. You worked for all these entrepreneurs. That's one way to become an entrepreneur. I've met many people who had that in their head, like, I'm going to eventually be an entrepreneur, so I'm going to work for a bunch of entrepreneurs. That's fine. That was not my story at all. My story and why I developed Tint was because I wanted to solve a problem that just seemed like duh, to
Yeah.
me, that no one was doing. And every morning I'd wake up and think, I got to go do this. And so I think that's the key thing that I would say to myself, to other people now, is like, just know that you want to do something maybe that is slightly in front of you that seems like a pretty good idea, and you're going to learn a lot of things from that experience too.
All right, what's your
Yeah.
next question, Claire? Go ahead.
I really resonate with what you said about linear career paths because, like, as a high school senior, I feel like a lot of people are like pressuring you or asking you about like different career paths, but I think it's really good to like keep an open mind.
Totally.
My second question is, what's the best business advice that somebody has given you?
I'll say two things. Enjoy what you're doing and do it to the best of your ability. I see way too many people that, I've managed over the years, people who have sat alongside me over the years, where they're so concerned about getting to that next step, right? And it's
Mhm.
sort of along the lines, people talk about enjoying the moment. I think that the transparency of not enjoying what you're doing and enjoying and not really putting in the effort that you're putting in, because you're so concerned about where you'll be, is just, it's not helpful to you. So I think that that is a piece of advice, and figuring out, you know, maybe how am I going to enjoy this moment too?
Yeah.
And I think that's just super critical. So one of my kids, I mean, just as an example, one of my kids never in a million years thought that she was going to be a waitress, and she graduated from school, and she majored in storytelling, is an incredible writer, and she graduated at a time when there was a writer strike. There was, a lot of stuff going on, with layoffs and AI, and, what she thought was going to be her career kind of turned upside down. She had worked on some podcasts. She decided that there were pieces of the podcast world that she really liked that she didn't know much about. She ended up figuring out how to do audio engineering. She took some classes online in audio engineering and thought it was really interesting. Not that she had done any of that in college, but she ended up taking a job waitressing. And the thing that she has really enjoyed about waitressing is talking to people, and how people have, these impressions that maybe she didn't graduate from college, that she's here because maybe she had done something wrong along the way. And every day she has come home and tells me all of these stories about, there's all different people working with her. She really enjoys it. She actually started a blog. She was just telling me at the work, and she makes people laugh about different components about that. And everybody's like looking forward to it. So she makes the best of the
Mhm.
situation that she's in right now. And I think that when you figure out how to do that, then I think what ultimately ends up happening is that the stars align and you end up doing something different. So always enjoying and figuring out how you can do good while you're here, even if you're even if it's just a stop point for you.
Mhm.
Claire, can you jump to our how we like to wrap up, because I want to be respectful of our guests' time, can you jump to our rapid fire questions? So Kara, our special guest host, gets a sheet of rapid fire questions. They can pick a few of them, and I'll let Claire pick those. And then your challenge is to answer them rapidly as well.
Okay. I'll be rapid.
Go for it, Claire.
What's a book that you would recommend to somebody? A favorite book?
Aside from hers, Undaunted.
Yeah.
You know what? Full disclosure, I'm terrible at titles of books, but one of the books that is one of my favorite books is by Chris Voss, and it's called Split the Difference. And it's about negotiating with people. And again, negotiation, a lot of people think it means, money, right? It doesn't have to be. Life is a negotiation, right? You want something different in a restaurant, and they're like, no, you can't have that. I mean, how do you actually get that done? It's an excellent book. It's also an audio version too.
I'll make sure to check it out. Another question is, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
Enjoy the ride.
Another question is, do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
So I hike every day. I live in Marin County, and I hike with my dogs and my husband, but my 3 Labradors every day. And if I don't get my hike in, I'm kind of a mess. So I have to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with having those activities that you can do to just take a moment to relax.
Exactly.
So at WIT, our motto is doing whatever it takes. So what does whatever it takes mean to you?
I think remembering what you've done and what you've accomplished is really helpful to be able to get up and do whatever it takes. So whenever you're thinking that you have something in front of you that is just so challenging, so when you've got to get up and say, I can do this. And here's the reasons why I can do this, because I've done this before. And think of those hardest times in your life where you were the most challenged, but you got through it. Maybe things didn't go exactly the way that you thought they were going to go, but they ended up going a little bit differently, and it worked out okay. Maybe it worked out better. And I think that that is the most important thing to remember.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That was my last question, so thank you.
Okay, I wanted to jump in because I know we usually end on that question, but I feel like, Kara, you're usually asking people another question. And so I really want to hear your answer to this question before we all wrap up here today. I want to know what makes you unstoppable.
Unstoppable or undaunted, or either one?
I mean, either one. I mean, I feel like that's funny that you make that distinction, because when I was listening to your book, I kept thinking it could also be called Unstoppable, because the thing about you is that, and this is why I really encourage people to get the book, is I love how she tells the stories of the journey. And I think we have to talk about the journey when it comes to entrepreneurship, not just the end goal or the end result. And Kara takes you into that journey. And I actually kept thinking, okay, we go back to the book and I'm like, okay, it's called, but like, she is unstoppable. Everywhere you turned, it was just, you just kept going, and somebody said no. And you said, but what's one thing we can do? Like, maybe we can't do that big thing, but what's one thing we can do right now? So you can choose whether it's what makes you undaunted or unstoppable, but I know you are both.
I laugh because my podcast is called The Kara Goldin Show now, but it used to be called Unstoppable.
Yes.
And we switched it for a bunch of different reasons, but Undaunted and Unstoppable are very, very similar in many ways. But what makes me unstoppable and undaunted? I think about when I'm in a place where I feel like I don't necessarily want to be in this place, the way to move forward is to live unstoppable, live undaunted. And I've realized this over and over and over again in my entire life. And that I think it's something that you can't get stuck. You can't stay in, you can't get, complacent in a place where, you don't want to be too. And so I think that that is the key thing to remember. It's interesting because I think that when you look at people who are unstoppable or who are undaunted, they're the key thing that I see when I go and do the research on them is it wasn't always easy, right? They definitely had stops along the way. You mentioned earlier when you're seeing the Instagram moments that and pretty pictures and everything looks, glamorous. There's a lot of schlepping that goes on along the way in order to get there, and often failures. But ultimately, they rise up and they go out and they keep going and they, pivot. They do something else, whatever it is. And then they go back and think about those lessons. And that's what I think that hearing those stories for me actually helps me to be more undaunted, right? So to your point, I've always appreciated the stories. I've never really wanted people to solve my problems for me. I've wanted to solve my own problems. It'd be great if people waved their magic wand and solved all your problems, right, Claire? But the reality is they usually can't. And so I think that is another realization for me, and something that I share with people too, that if you want to live undaunted, look in the mirror and figure out how to get there. And sometimes you get the most strength from hearing other people's stories on how they did it. And if they can do it, you can probably do it too. You just have to figure out your own path.
I'm so grateful that you joined us today. And as the listener and the viewer know, this is your time to really take action based on what you've heard today. You've heard so many wonderful lessons and stories from Kara and calls to action. Like, where can you be curious? Where can you bring value? Where can you be appreciating where you are right now in your journey and knowing that it's just a stop along the way? There's so many wonderful additional stories in her book, Undaunted. You will learn more about our giveaway in the caption that we post on YouTube and when we promote this on Instagram. But right now, go ahead. You can get it on Audible. You can get it from the store. You can buy the book, listen to the book. She's a beautiful storyteller, and she's also real and raw, and she'll take you into the highs and the lows. And Kara, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. You sharing your story, I'm being very sincere and honest with you, really helped me these past few days because I'm going through some stuff over here at WIT, and you were that. It's so when you were just saying, when people share their stories, it helps you. Well, you helped me. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for being on the podcast. And Claire, thank you for coming on and sharing. You can learn more about Claire at Gifted Seams, so you can buy her product. And thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you. So fun.